Hello, Player One. Welcome to the Gaming History Club. My name is Gabby.
Hello, and I'm JP. Every explosion, every shadow, every flicker of light on screen, underneath it all, it's just ones and zeros. So, how do we get from binary code to full blown visual worlds? Let's break down the journey of the graphics card. So, Gabby, graphics cards, they're one of them things that have like a million different names, right?
Yep.
I mean, these days, the trendy term for them is GPU, which is short for Graphics Processing Unit. But I mean, historically, people have called them all kinds of things: video cards, display cards, 3D accelerators, you name it. But here at Gaming History Club, we prefer the term graphics card over GPU. And why? Well, because the GPU is just one of the many parts that make up a graphics card. Calling a graphics card a GPU is kind of like calling a car an engine. Technically not wrong, but missing the full picture.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, a car still needs like
Yeah,
the
aircon.
steering wheel and aircon.
Aircon, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And a CD player. Man, we're old. Anyway, the GPU is the chip at the heart of it all, sure. But a graphics card also includes the casing, the cooling system, usually a fan or two,
Or three.
or three, the display ports, but also other key technical components like the VRAM, which aren't part of the GPU chip itself. But remember this, player one. Graphics cards are the cars, and GPUs are the engines. We're not here to be very strict stiffless about terminology here, but it's really good if you can understand the distinction between the two, because we're going to be talking about both a lot throughout this episode. And no, we won't be diving into the inner workings of GPUs or graphics cards today. This episode is just about the history and not how they work, because that's just a whole other level up.
Wait, so we're not going to talk about all those CUDA cores and all of the cores,
Or the CUDA
basically?
cores and the embarrassingly parallel calculations?
Yes.
No, maybe some other time when we get even more technical than we are already getting.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So, to truly understand the birth of graphics cards, we first need to dig into the history of arcade machines and early computer displays, the good old days. Put simply, graphics cards are responsible for rendering what you see on the monitors, but the earliest iconic arcade cabinets from the early 70s, like Computer Space and Pong, didn't exactly operate like modern computers. They didn't really have what we call graphics cards.
No, they certainly didn't. It was very different. All of the components are a little bit different actually. It was probably more similar to like our calculators and watches than they are to our computers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these early games were built using TTL or transistor logic. And probably if you've heard our past episodes, you'll be like, here goes the TTL again.
Here goes the
But,
TTL.
it's important part of gaming history. But what does that mean in plain English? There was no software involved, so in the case of Pong, for example, the game was literally built out of 66 TTL chips. So there was no programming code. The physical wiring of these logic chips was literally the game. So think of them more like mechanical clocks, like you said before, than digital watches. So it's intricate, it's precise, and entirely hardware based, and also very purpose built for that and that only.
Oh yeah, they couldn't do anything other than play Pong. If you try to like install I don't know, Minesweep on a Pong machine, you'll find that very quickly it's an impossible task.
Yeah, I don't think that would work. But yeah, how did Pong itself generate graphics? Through math and engineering. So timed electrical signal were sent to a CRT or cathode ray tube, guiding an electron beam to draw shapes on the screen. So the idea of a game lived in the wires, the voltages, and the beam of light itself.
That's very poetic, Abby. I love it. But anyway, there was a lot of TMI about TTL, so video games wouldn't run on TTL chips forever. Actually, it was for quite a short time in total, actually. By 1975, arcade machines began transitioning to microprocessors already. And to keep things simple, You can think of a microprocessor as a CPU, though technically not all microprocessors are CPUs. All CPUs are microprocessors.
Okay, okay,
But the reverse isn't always true. But honestly, for the sake of this episode, we can just consider them CPUs. It's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
okay.
It's
For
simplifying.
now.
It's simplifying, that's all. The first arcade game to use one was Gunfight, of course, developed by Midway in 1975, and we covered it more deeply in our Game Reboots and Revivals episode. So we'll skip the rabbit hole this time, but it's such a fascinating game to look at in terms of like remastering and revivals, because first the game used TTL when it was made by Taito, and then when Midway redone it, it used the CPU microprocessor. Was very, very cool. But anyway, Gunfight ran on the Intel 8080 microprocessor, and it was a pivotal chip that clocked at 200 megahertz and helped spark the PC revolution.
2 megahertz.
2 megahertz, yeah.
You said 200 megahertz.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Oh, darn. Okay, no, we're like really, really far away from 200 megahertz. Okay, player one, it was just 2 megahertz, okay.
Okay.
But it did spark the PC revolution with just 2 megahertz, believe me. Because get this, there's even an asteroid named 8080 Intel in its honor, and that's how deep its impact goes. So the same chip also powered Space Invaders by Taito, made in 1978, and that was of course the game often credited with launching the golden age of arcade gaming. And this marked a philosophical turning point in game design. Before, games were sculpted in fixed logic and they were literally etched in the stone of circuitry, like mechanical monuments. But with microprocessors, designers began to write in clay. Suddenly games were software and you could edit them, you can program them. It was like the dawn of code as imagination and imagination as instruction. And now game architecture started to resemble a lot more of what we're used to nowadays. So we have the game code burned to ROM, the read-only memory. It's interpreted and processed by a CPU, and it's visualized through bitmapped frame buffers and sprite rendering.
Okay, let's take a pause here and address a key question. Why are we talking about microprocessors and CPUs instead of actually talking about graphics cards?
Wait, is the episode about graphics cards?
No, it's not.
Was it about CPUs? I'm sure it was about CPUs. Let me check my notes.
Yeah, it's about TTL.
Ah, that makes a lot more sense.
No, but anyway, the answer is actually really simple. Early video games didn't have dedicated graphics cards. Back then, games were powered and processed by CPUs and CPUs only. In those days, CPUs were like the Swiss Army knives of video game hardware. They were multifunctional, versatile, and able to handle a range of tasks. For 2D games, for example, especially during the early 80s, CPUs were up to the challenge. They were the heart and the brain of the system, managing everything from the game logic to the graphics. Classic consoles like the NES, SNES, and Sega Genesis didn't use the specialized GPUs we know today. Instead, they relied on video display processors or custom chips, which were specifically designed for tile and sprite manipulation. So the CPU was the all in one solution, and its role was far more expansive than just running game logic. It was also crafting the visual, transforming the console into this jack of all trades in the world of video gaming.
So now that we've talked about arcade machines and touched very briefly on the home consoles too, I can already hear the PC gamers, or as they like to call themselves, the quote-unquote master race, eagerly waiting for us to finally talk computers. Alright then, well, let's do it. Before we really dive into graphics cards, let's have a look at the computers. So as we mentioned before, graphics cards are built to display and later render what we see on our monitors. And that's why historically they were often called video cards as well. The evolution of graphics cards is actually very, very deeply tied to the development of computer display technology itself. Let's just keep in mind, even displaying simple text on a screen was a milestone in early computing. One of the first computers capable of real-time visual output was MIT's Whirlwind 1 computer, which became operational in 1951. But while it's a fascinating part of the story, it's a little too far back in the timeline for our purposes. It belongs to an era of machines built for military and research labs, not for gaming, and certainly not for the living room.
It's probably the living room itself.
Yeah, it's probably as big as like a very rich person's living room.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're focused on the era when displays and the hardware that powered them started becoming available to everyday users like you and me. That's where the story of graphics cards really begins. So instead of starting with military grade machines from the 50s, we'll begin in the early 80s, when display technology started making its way to everyday users. First, we got IBM's monochrome display adapter, also known as MDA, released in 1981. It offered only basic text output, no graphics whatsoever. It could show green, amber, or white text on black, which basically means are you more of a Matrix fan, Fallout New Vegas, or regular old DOS? It could display at a resolution of 720 by 350 pixels. Sounds limited, but at the time that was crystal clear compared to the competition. And since early PCs were used mostly for word processing and data entry anyway, clarity beats color. Enter IBM's Color Graphics Adapter CGA, also from 1981, and now that added a splash of color, up to 16 in fact. But there was a catch. Resolution dropped the more colors you wanted to display. So if you want all 16 colors displayed at the same time, you're stuck at 160 by 100 pixels. Can you imagine? It's very pixelated indeed.
Yeah, that's tiny.
Absolutely. Prefer something a bit sharper though? Two colors would get you up to 640 by 200 pixels. But that was still not as clean as MDA's 720 by 350, which meant MDA often stayed the go-to for business users.
But of course, innovation didn't rest. In 1982, Hercules Computer Technology launched the Hercules graphics card. So they combined MDA's crisp text with the CGA like graphics support. So it kind of hit a sweet spot, and it sold over 500,000 units by 1985. So that's within 3 years, and grabbing 18% of the early graphics card market. So definitely it was quite popular.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the mid 80s. That is still a very young time in, personal computing, you might say. So that's a big market share.
But of course, the game changer though, Video Graphics Array or VGA from IBM that was released in 1987. VGA brought 640 times 480 resolution, support for 256 colors, so those resolution will be stable, like you can always use that resolution, and even early image smoothing. No wonder it became the new gold standard, and of course the resolution many of us DOS gamers remember very fondly.
If MDA was the telegraph, then VGA was the television. It wasn't just a tool for information, but a canvas for imagination. And with that leap, the stage was set for graphics cards to evolve from just humble display tools into the powerhouses behind modern gaming, or modern-ish anyway. We're getting old. I'm making this sound like we're in the mid 2000s right now.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, VGA, but that was old, and now we're in the modern times.
Can it run Crisis?
Oh, can it run Microsoft Paint at this point?
True.
But here's something to keep in mind, Player One. From a technical standpoint, the cards like Hercules, they were focused solely on outputting a signal to the monitor. They weren't doing the heavy lifting of actually rendering the images, because that job, the actual drawing of graphics, that was still being handled entirely by the CPU.
So, this is the perfect point to bring GPUs back into focus, because there's still debate over what counts as the first real GPU and even what a GPU actually is. You see, CPUs handle early 2D games just fine, but as game designers began pushing the envelope with parallax scrolling, sprite scaling, screen rotation, transparency effects, and even in game mirrors, the strain started to show. So, in the early 90s, we entered the graphics accelerator era, a crucial prelude to the GPU revolution. Cards like the S3 Trio 64 and Matrox Millennium began offloading specific rendering tasks and video playback from the CPU. So these accelerators weren't built just for gaming. They were also giving us smoother user interface, like how your mouse cursor move and how your multimedia actually plays on your computer. So not exactly game dev gold, but still a huge push toward what came next.
Yeah, because and then games got real good. And not just flashy, but extra dimensional. The mid 90s brought a full on 3D renaissance, and with it, a breaking point. You see 2D tricks that just weren't enough anymore. In a world of 2D only, the CPU might have remained king, but once games needed to simulate depth, light, and motion through space, a new kind of card was needed. One that didn't just assist the CPU, but stood shoulder to shoulder with it. Imagine a new organ inside of the body of the machine was needed, and now the GPU was ready to be born. So, player one, why was the GPU finally ready to be born? Well, let's talk video games.
Finally.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of these, huh? So Doom from '93, the killer app that made players realize how transformative, immersive 3D could even be, even if it wasn't technically true 3D. It set the stage for a whole new era, priming audiences for even more demanding titles. But here's the kicker: it ran on CPUs, barely. Players with slow machines often suffered from very choppy frame rates, especially in the more action packed moments with many enemies on screen at the same time. Then, of course, Flight Simulator 5 by Microsoft. Before it was called Microsoft Flight Simulator, of course, it was Flight Sim. So that focused heavily on realism with 3D terrain and weather effects. This one needed a powerhouse of a CPU just to be playable. It quickly became the benchmark game, a test to see if your system was up to snuff. But hey, it might not be able to run Crysis, but at least it could run Flight Sim 5.
And of course, don't forget System Shock from 94. I mean, it has intricate 3D world and rich environments, immersive UI overlays, and advanced simulation mechanics. It was definitely a demanding beast, and for many players, running it smoothly was nothing but a dream.
Yeah, these were truly rebel games. These ones dared to dream bigger than the hardware of the time could handle. They literally pushed computers to their limits without the cutting edge hardware we take for granted today. And as a result, the industry had no choice but to respond with dedicated graphics solutions. Because let's face it, CPUs and graphics accelerators simply weren't cutting it for this new generation of 3D games. Gamers needed something more. They needed a dedicated GPU.
So we're back here again. What was actually the first true GPU? Well, that depends on who you ask. A popular definition says a real GPU must include a TNL engine, so that stands for Transform and Lighting, or sometimes it's also called TCL, which is Transformation, Clipping, and Lighting. Let's break that down. So, transformation is basically turning a 3D scene into a 2D image. So, what you see on the monitor. Clipping ensures that only the visible parts of the scene are drawn so they save resources. I mean, if the game has the entire map of the USA, it won't need to show the whole thing if you just play inside a building, right?
Yeah, I mean, that would be beneficial. Yeah,
Yeah,
very efficient, actually.
it doesn't need to run the whole thing, but yeah. And the last one, lighting. Adjust the colors and shadow based on the light source, giving depth and realism. For the better part of the 90s, developers assumed CPUs would be able to handle TNL through software only, but as we've seen with Doom, System Shock, and Flight Sim, there was a bit of a wishful thinking actually. Still, though, before dedicated TNL hardware became standard, game changing 3D focused graphics cards were already here. We actually mentioned very few graphics cards so far, but now enter the 3DFX Voodoo graphics card that was launched in 1996. Okay, so technically, it didn't actually include a TNL engine, so if you're a purist, you might say, this wasn't a real GPU. But come on, this thing was a beast. It was one of the first dedicated consumer 3D only graphics cards. So, yeah, you heard that right. You needed a separate 2D VGA card to handle basic visuals, but once you plugged the Voodoo in, games looked and played like magic. The 3DFX Voodoo card revolutionized PC gaming with hardware acceleration and annihilating the 3D performance competition. 3DFX even had a deal in place to power the Sega Dreamcast until actually Sega kind of pivoted last minute to NEC's Power VR chipset, but yeah, almost. Still though, the Voodoo line became the must-have hardware for PC gamers. It had a cult following and honestly, it kinda still does. A sealed Voodoo 3 on eBay today can actually cost thousands of dollars. And truly, it costs that much just because of nostalgia. So you might ask again at this point, what was actually the first dedicated GPU with a built-in TNL engine? Because you know what, we haven't answered that. If you had to guess based on who's still making $60 billion a year today, you'd probably land on the right answer. Yup, NVIDIA's GeForce 256, released in October 1999, was marketed as the world's first GPU, a term they defined as a single chip processor with integrated transform lighting, triangle setup slash clipping, and rendering engines that is capable of processing a minimum of 10 million polygons per second. I'm imagining those like big conference thing, basically.
Yeah, you're pretty much doing it a lot of justice. It's a very, very specific definition, though, isn't it? But to be fair, it was a really good graphics card.
Yeah, definitely for the time. It integrated hardware transform and lighting directly into the GPU, offloading tasks that used to fall on the CPU. This reduced complexity and cost, opening the door for more powerful 3D gaming on consumers' hardware. But now here's the nuance. Nvidia didn't invent the GPU and they didn't actually coin the term either, but they popularized it for gamers. Their marketing was bold and honestly effective. Just know that calling the GeForce 256 the first GPU is kind of like saying Pong was the first video game. It was a solid milestone, but the story actually goes deeper than that.
The story does go deeper, and I think now's actually a great time to circle back to briefly talking about the arcades and home consoles. Because the arcade machines, which were always the bleeding edge of gaming hardware back then, they already had been doing hardware transform and lighting years before the GeForce 256. Let's take the Sega Model 2 board from '93, for example. So this one powered hits like Dead or Alive, Sega Rally Championship, and The House of the Dead. But these weren't general purpose chips like in PCs. They were full custom boards that cost around $15,000 at launch, which is about $25,000 adjusted for inflation. So yeah, they were powerful, but far from accessible as well. The GeForce 256 democratized that tech. And even in the living room, home consoles were already stepping up too. The PlayStation, launched in '94, marketed its 32-bit chip as a quote-unquote Sony GPU. And that was 4 years before Nvidia made the term mainstream. So the PlayStation 1, its TNL, though it was still mostly software driven as well. It wasn't offloading everything exclusively to the GPU. And the Nintendo 64 had a dedicated coprocessor as well, which they called the Reality coprocessor, and that too could handle geometry and lighting tasks. But again, it was software based and less efficient than true hardware TNL. So with all this in mind, you can see, Player One, why Nvidia's claim to the first GPU holds up by their own very, very specific definition. And if you can still remember what that definition even was in the first place, I'd be extremely impressed with you. But it's also a very nuanced history, what the first GPU really was. But anyway, what truly matters, Player One, is this. The GeForce 256 wasn't just a leap forward, it set the modern precedent for what a graphics card would be in the age of 3D gaming. So by the end of the 90s, the GeForce 256 had fired a warning shot. The age of true 3D hardware acceleration had begun. and gamers finally had a card that did more than just draw pictures. It understood the 3D scene itself. But Nvidia is not the only player in this game. The 2000s opened with a full-on arms race between graphics card manufacturers. ATI, a Canadian company that had been making graphics cards since the 1980s actually, was Nvidia's most direct rival, and they were about to make some serious waves. Especially while Nvidia was coming out with their GeForce 2 and 3 cards, ATI struck back with its Radeon line in 2000, and the Radeon DDR was a shot across the bow, and it really marked ATI's shift from just keeping up to pushing innovation themselves too. It wasn't just Nvidia anymore. And the 2000s in general wouldn't just be about speed and shaders either. It was the beginning of programmable pipelines, cinematic effects, pixel and vertex shaders, and an ever-increasing race towards photorealism.
As you said before, ATI wasn't just keeping up anymore. With the Radeon 9800 Pro released in 2003, they delivered a GPU that many considered the definitive graphics card of its generation. Nvidia? What Nvidia? Like,
Who?
who?
Never heard of them.
Yeah, they definitely wanted to go with this one because it featured full support for DirectX 9, cutting edge pixel and vertex shader power, and crushed benchmarks in games like Half Life 2 and Far Cry. For a while, it was the card to beat, and for a lot of gamers, the card they saved up for. According to PC Gamer, they say this entire architectural generation would see ATI beating Nvidia at pretty much every turn, and a wide memory bus and significant performance with growing anti-aliasing technologies saw it stay that way for a while. But behind the scenes, the industry wasn't just evolving, it was consolidating. 3DFX, the legendary company behind the Voodoo line, collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Unfortunately, after missing key technological shifts and failing to keep pace, it was acquired by Nvidia in 2000. So the Voodoo name vanished, but Nvidia absorbed their patents, engineers, and some of their swagger for the relatively small sum of $70 million. Meanwhile, on the other hand, ATI's fate took a different turn. After battling toe to toe with Nvidia throughout the early 2000s, they were acquired by AMD in 2006 for $5.4 billion. This marked the beginning of an era where CPUs and GPUs would increasingly work hand in hand, not just in the same machine, but sometimes on the same chip. The landscape was shifting. GPU manufacturers were no longer just graphics specialists, they were becoming ecosystem architects. And as we push forward in this episode, we'll see how that shift laid in the groundwork for today's battle between Nvidia, AMD, and even Apple and Intel, if you want to put it in there.
Yeah, it's crazy comparing like nowadays back to like say the 80s or 90s, for example. The graphics card market was like very diverse and kind of like the Wild West. So let's have a look at some of the major players, right? So we had Hercules, which was known for its hybrid text and graphics card in the early 80s. Zeng Labs, beloved for their fast 2D accelerators. S3 Graphics, a big name in 2D and early 3D acceleration. Matrox, especially their Millennium cards that were powerhouses for professionals. And 3DFX, of course, the kings of the Voodoo era, the first real cool graphics card brand. And Rendition, Service Logic, Trident, Number 9, Power VR, and many more. Each had its own approach, strength, and quirks. Some were legendary, others forgotten, but they gave gamers a buffet of visual possibilities. But then as we moved into the 2000s and 2010s, something changed. The market consolidated hard. Only a few major players survived the tech's arms race. So Nvidia rose to dominance by absorbing 3DFX and nailing generation after generation of gaming cards. ATI, after its golden Radeon years, was folded into AMD in 2006. Intel stayed in the game with integrated graphics, and eventually forayed into discrete GPUs as well with Arc much later. And Matrox retreated to niche professional use, and the rest vanished bought or pivoted to different industries. Most upsettingly for me, the naming conventions have changed too. Gone all the cool names like Voodoo Rush, Rage Fury, or Millennium G400. Now it's all kind of black and white cold numbers and letters like 8800 GTX, X1950 XT, or HD 4870. I mean, they're functional, yes, but this is like if rock bands stopped naming their albums and instead they just number them like, hey, album 1, album 1.5, the special edition, album 2, well, you get the gist.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, at the same time, home consoles were quietly partnering with these same players too. Microsoft's Xbox from 2001 used the custom NVIDIA NV2A GPU, and GameCube used ATI's Flipper chip, leading to ATI becoming a trusted console GPU provider before being bought up by AMD at that time. The Xbox 360 and the Nintendo Wii both had GPUs powered by ATI/AMD. Sony's PS3 used NVIDIA's RSX Reality Synthesizer, basically a modified 7800 GTX. From there on, like PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Series X, or Series S, they're all running custom AMD GPUs. So even in the console world, the list of players got smaller and smaller.
So, Player One, here we are, back in the present day, and after all this pixel pushing and shader chasing and acronym stacking, what do modern GPUs actually look like? Well, now obviously we're in the world of real-time ray tracing for photorealistic lighting and reflections, but of course we always abuse the word photorealistic a little bit too much whenever we are currently in the present day. Like, I'm sure people used to say that about, I don't know, like Mario 64. They probably didn't
No,
say it
it's
about
not.
Mario 64. Like Tomb Raider, like, oh wow, like these triangles are truly impressive, if you know what I mean. And of course, with AI, so how does it mix in with graphics card? Well, we've got the AI upscaling, like NVIDIA's DLSS, Deep Learning Super Sampling, and AMD's version, FSR, which is Fidelity FX Super Resolution. And these basically the games look sharper than they really are at the resolution they're set at. We got dedicated tensor and ray tracing cores as well. So that's even more extra hardware blocks on the chip for specific tasks. GPUs today are no longer just rendering machines. They're platforms for AI, cryptocurrency mining, neural network simulation, content creation, but of course, gaming. But let's not forget, it was us, the gamers, who've been the main driving force behind this graphics evolution. For decades, we've been the biggest and most demanding consumers of graphics cards. Game developers, in turn, kept pushing the envelope, not just for fun, but for immersion, expression, and storytelling. Without that creative arms race between player and developer, between software and hardware, it's very likely GPU technology wouldn't be nearly as advanced as it is today. So yeah, maybe we should be a little bit proud. We've tried to let this episode be very, not super technical with too many numbers and explaining, well, what is a megahertz and is it cool and does it smell nice? But let's do a little bit of comparison anyway between the GPU cards. So I've took one from each decade and I'll just run through some of its basic specs just so we can get a feel of how far we've actually come. So the Hercules graphics card, the one we spoke about, released in 1982, with just 64 kilobytes of RAM, but we would call that nowadays VRAM, though that term wasn't coined yet, and no clock speed to speak of. We were working with monochrome text basically, guys. That was crispy by the standards of the time. So we've got that one with 64 kilobytes of RAM. Then let's take 1996, the 3DFX Voodoo 1 graphics card. So don't forget, this was the first popular consumer 3D card. So that boasted 4 megabytes of VRAM and it was running at 50 megahertz. And this was a game changer for its time, as we mentioned. Everyone wanted this Voodoo card, yeah? How about the 2000s? So I picked the 2003 ATI Radeon 9800 Pro. This was known for being a powerhouse in the DirectX 9 era, and this had 128 megabytes of VRAM, and it was running at 380 megahertz. Okay? Luckily, we've only got 2 decades left, so let's take 2016's NVIDIA GTX 1080. And this was a really, really big card for its time, just before ray tracing became a thing. And this was pushing 8 gigabytes of VRAM at 1600 megahertz. And it was delivering stunning graphics for this generation. But now, what do we have nowadays? What's the latest flagship from NVIDIA? Well, of course, it's the RTX 5090. And it's featuring an insane 24 gigabytes of VRAM, running at a blazing 2.5 gigahertz. So how much better is the RTX 5090 compared to the Hercules from 1982?
Hercules sounds better.
It does sound better, of course, but it's actually 384,000 times worse than the RTX 5090.
Boo!
But obviously, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, graphics cards, they don't just get, better in terms of like, oh, there's more RAM now than there used to be.
Oh, okay, so that's only the RAM, is it?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
just the RAM itself. Obviously, there's like way over things that are going on without getting too technical about it. But basically, the RTX 5090 is a lot better than just 384,000 times better in terms of RAM. It's better for way over reasons too. But we won't delve into that this time. Maybe we'll dive into how graphics cards work in a future episode of Gaming History Club though. But for now, it's mind-blowing to see how far we've come. So, Player One, we hope we've been able to render your imagination and showcase some of the most important moments in gaming history that not only brought us visually stunning games, but also allowed for deeper immersion and gameplay mechanics that simply wouldn't have been possible without them.
Do you have a favorite graphics card from back in the day that we didn't mention, Player One? Do you want us to delve deeper into the hardware detail like JP said before, talking about the cores and stuff next time? Well, let us know by dropping us a message on our website, gaminghistory.club. And of course, don't forget you still have a chance to win our custom painted region unlocked SNES PAL version. If you want to see how you can enter and win this super cool SNES, head over to gaminghistory.club/SNES now. Remember, the competition closes on May 31st, so you actually still have time to submit. But yeah, we'll announce the winner on our episode dropping on June 18th. As usual, new episodes of Gaming History Club are released every other Wednesday, so make sure you subscribe and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Gaming History Club, and we're also on Blue Sky as gaminghistory.club.
Come back in a couple of weeks, Player One, because next time we're diving into something a little sicker than usual. See ya!